Mr. Darcy said nothing at all. That evening in the drawing room.
Do you truly prefer reading to cards, Miss Elizabeth?
I prefer many great things to cards, Mr. Bingley.
It's amazing to me, said Mr. Bingley, how young girls can have the patience to be so accomplished as they all are.
I cannot boast of knowing more than half a dozen in all my acquaintance that are truly accomplished.
Well then, Mr. Darcy, you must comprehend a great deal in your idea of an accomplished woman.
A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages. She must be well trained in the fighting styles of Kyoto masters and modern tactics and weaponry of Europe. To all this she must possess, and to all this she must yet add something more substantial, and the improvement of her mind by extensive reading.
I am no longer surprised at you knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder at you knowing any at all. Elizabeth soon afterwards left the room.
To walk 3 miles, or whatever it is, above her ankles in dirt, and alone, quite alone, because her sister had a cold.
Such an exhibition. What could she mean by it?
It seems to me to show some sort of, conceited independence, such an indifference to decorum.
Another ballroom.
Elizabeth was far from suspecting that she, herself, was becoming some interest in the eyes of
Mr. Darcy. At first he had scarcely allowed her to be pretty.
He had looked at her with her admiration at the last ball.
But when they next met, he began to find her face rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of the dark eyes.
And her uncommon skill with the blade. He began to wish to know more of her.
Elizabeth was suddenly addressed by
Mr. Darcy.
It took her so much by surprise in his application for her hand, that without knowing what she did, she accepted him. If Master Lou had seen such a lapse of wariness, 20 lashes at least! What a lovely dance.
Yes.
It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you have to make some remark on the size of the room, or the number of couples.
He smiled and assured her that whatever she wished him to say should be said.
Very well. That reply will do for the present. I see a great similarity in the tone of our minds, sir. We are each in a social taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak unless we expect to say something that'll amaze the whole room, or be regarded as uncommonly clever.
This is no very striking resemblance to your own character, I am sure. How near it may be to mine, I cannot pretend to say. You think it a faithful portrait, undoubtedly.
I'm merely trying to make out your character. I've heard so many different accounts of you, it's puzzled me exceedingly.
I can readily believe that. But I could wish, Miss Bennet, that you were not to sketch my character at the present moment.
But if I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity.
I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours.
They parted.
In silence.
On each side dissatisfied.
Though not to an equal degree.
As Elizabeth had no longer any of her own interests to pursue, she focused her attention entirely on
Her sister.
And Mr. Bingley.
She saw in this all the felicity which a marriage of true affection could bestow. Her mother's thoughts were plainly bent the same way. Somewhat.
Oh, just look at them. So young, so beautiful, so rich. Once Jane and Mr. Bingley marry, all my younger daughters will be thrown to the acquaintance of many a rich man. Oh, what a happy ending.
In vain did Elizabeth endeavour to check the rapidity of her mother's words, or at least in using a less audible whisper, for she could perceive that the chief of the conversation was overheard by Mr. Darcy, who sat opposite to them.
What is Mr. Darcy to me? Pray that I should be afraid of him.
Elizabeth blushed with shame and vexation. She could not help glancing at Mr. Darcy, and every glance convinced her of what she dreaded.
The expression on his face changed gradually from indignant contempt to a composed and steady gravity.
This uncomfortable scene was fortunately interrupted by the appearance of
Zombies! In the kitchens, Darcy, if you care to.
Of course.
Shall we to the kitchen?
I don't suppose, said Darcy, that you would give me the honour of dispensing of this unhappy business alone. I should never forgive myself if your gown was soiled.
Oh, the honour is all yours, Mr. Darcy.
And she thought she detected the slightest smile on his face.
She watched
As Mr. Darcy drew his blade, cut down 2 zombies with savage,
Yet dignified.
movements.
and...
There was no denying Mr. Darcy's talents as a warrior.
If only his talents as a gentleman were to their equal.
Hope is over, entirely over.
The next day,
Hope is over, entirely over.
The Bingleys had settled to London for the winter. Regrettably, Mr. Bingley could not pay respects to friends before leaving.
Elizabeth Bennet expressed her indignation. Her heart was torn between concern for her sister and going immediately to London and dispensing the lot of them. My dear Jane, you are too good.
Jane sighed. Sigh. Dear Lizzie, do not give way to such feelings as these. Remember your training and temper your feelings. Do you truly suppose he's been influenced to avoid me?
Darcy.
But why?
Wealth. Consequence.
Connections.
Pride.
Jane's spirit suffered, and from this time, Mr. Bingley's name was scarcely ever mentioned between them.
A
surprise visitor. Darcy?
In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression.
He spoke well.
But there were feelings not only of the heart,